Something happened today that looks small on the surface, almost trivial, even, but when you put it in context, it reveals something much larger about how power, messaging, and credibility are working right now. And the reason most people are missing it is that they are treating this as a personality story. It is not. It is three separate things that are actually one connected system. Here is the first thing. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, flew to Kyiv and stood at the Kyiv Security Forum. And what he delivered there was not a symbolic appearance. It was a structured, deliberate argument about American responsibility. He did not mention Donald Trump by name. He did not need to. He said the United States has a singular role in Ukraine's story, not just because of power, but because of a specific historical commitment. When Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994, America was part of the assurance that Ukraine's sovereignty and borders would be respected. That is not opinion. That is a reference to a real agreement, the Budapest Memorandum. And Harry's argument was simple: credibility in global politics is not about statements. It is about whether countries honor the commitments they have already signed. That is the first thing. Here is the second thing. Later that same day, Trump was asked about those remarks. And instead of engaging with the substance, the treaty, the war, the argument, he responded with 4 words directed at Meghan Markle. How's his wife? Then he added that Harry does not speak for the UK, and that he himself speaks for the UK. On the surface, that looks like a joke. Or a dismissal. It is neither. It is a signal. Because when a head of state responds to a geopolitical argument by shifting to a personal remark, one of two things is happening. Either the argument is being deliberately avoided, or the speaker is being deliberately diminished. In this case, given the history between Trump and Harry, it is almost certainly both. And that leads to the third thing, the part that connects everything. Timing. This entire exchange is happening just days before King Charles III is scheduled to arrive in Washington for a state visit alongside Queen Camilla. So you have two parallel dynamics unfolding at the same time. On one side, Trump is publicly praising the official monarchy, calling the king strong, respected, and important. On the other, he is dismissing one of the most globally visible members of that same royal family. And at the exact same moment, that same royal figure, Harry, is standing in Kyiv making an argument about American credibility in a live war. That is not random. That is positioning. Now, let me walk you through what is actually happening beneath the surface, because this is where the story changes from a headline into a system. Start with Harry. His speech was not a celebrity intervention. It was a strategic communication. He chose Kyiv, not London, not New York. He chose this week, not next month. And he chose language that directly invoked a legal framework, not emotional appeals, not general statements. That combination does one thing: it forces the conversation back to commitments. Not opinions. Commitments. Now look at Trump's response in that context. By refusing to engage with the argument itself, he avoids entering that framework entirely. Because engaging with the Budapest Memorandum means answering a difficult question. Is the United States upholding the security assurances it helped create? And that is not a question that can be answered with rhetoric alone. So instead, the conversation is shifted. From treaties to personalities. From obligations to individuals. That is not accidental. That is control of narrative. Now step back and look at the geopolitical layer. Ukraine is still at war. And in that context, there are only two things that matter for countries watching this conflict: capability and credibility. America clearly has capability. The question Harry raised, deliberately, from inside a war zone, is about credibility. And credibility is not measured by what leaders say. It is measured by whether past commitments still mean something when they are tested. That is why this moment matters. Because the gap between the argument and the response is not just rhetorical. It is structural. On one side, you have a historically grounded argument about international agreements. On the other, you have a response that does not engage with that framework at all. And that gap sends a signal, not just to Ukraine, but to every country that relies on security assurances from larger powers. Now, here is the broader implication. If countries begin to believe that security guarantees are flexible, that they depend on political context rather than fixed commitments, then the entire logic of non-proliferation starts to weaken. Because the Budapest Memorandum was not just about Ukraine. It was part of a global system designed to reduce nuclear weapons by offering security in exchange. If that system is perceived as unreliable, the incentive structure changes. And that is the part of this story that is not being discussed enough. This is not just about Trump. This is not just about Harry. This is about how credibility functions in international politics in 2026. Now, bring it back to timing one more time. The king arrives in Washington in days. Cameras will focus on diplomacy, ceremony, alliance. But in parallel, there is a separate conversation happening, one that is less visible but far more consequential. A British prince standing in Kyiv. A US president choosing not to engage with his argument. And a war that continues regardless of both. Here is the bottom line. Harry raised a question about commitments. Trump declined to answer that question directly. And the way that question was handled tells you something real about how foreign policy is being communicated right now. Not through formal statements, but through what is engaged with, and what is not. Because in geopolitics, silence is not empty. And neither is deflection. They are both forms of response. And sometimes, they say more than an official answer ever could. He asked about her. Not about Ukraine. Not about treaties. Not about the war. And that tells you exactly where the conversation was, and where it was not.